After 4 years living in Vienna, here I am back in Tehran. From the moment I arrived at Mehrabad Airport and caught sight of the first customs agent, I immediately felt the repressive air of my country. Do you have anything forbidden? Fashion magazines, tapes, alcohol, pork? No, sir. Please fix your veil, my sister. Yes, my brother. Next, come on, speed it up. Brother and sister are terms used in Iran by the representatives of the law to give orders to people without offending them. There were people everywhere. Each passenger was being met by a dozen people. Suddenly, amongst the crowd, I spotted my parents. But it wasn't reciprocal. Of course, it made sense. One changes more between the ages of 14 and 18 than between 30 and 40. Dad! Abby, look, it's Margie. Marge? My darling, my daughter. Oh my, I didn't recognize you. I knew that I had grown, but it was only once I was in the arms of my father that I really felt it. He who had always before appeared so imposing was about the same size as me. I can't believe my eyes. Tell us, are you hungry? Dad, you know what it's like on Iran Air. They feed you at least 50 times. Then we got in the car. My father didn't have his Cadillac anymore, but drove a Renault S instead. The same Cadillac in which I was ashamed to sit because it was so difficult to accept being more comfortable than others. Now that I myself had understood distress, I no longer asked these kinds of questions. I would even have preferred that he come get me with the better car, as a way to remind me of a more glorious time. I didn't feel like talking. I pretended to look at the city, even though it was too dark to see anything. Welcome home. They were the most comforting words that I had heard in a long time. I went straight to the living room. There was still that sofa on which my parents had announced that they were sending me to Austria. Entering into a conversation about this subject scared me so much that I headed for my room like a boar without saying good night or goodbye. My room. I was overjoyed to finally have a place of my own, and this reassured me. I didn't want to turn on the light. I couldn't bear to see everything again so quickly. I spent a good part of the night in the emptiness, just happy to be there. And the next morning, yay, it snowed. In Vienna, I hated snow, especially when I found myself on the street. You appreciate snow much better when you see it from the window of a warm room. I took stock of my surroundings. Before leaving Iran, I worshipped punks, to the point of having drawn one on my wall. What shit. Then I took stock of my property. I owned an empty armoire, a too small desk, a bed, a rug, and a cassette radio. I wouldn't mind listening to some Kim Wilde. I looked in the drawer where I usually kept my tapes. I didn't find them. So I went to see my mother. She would surely know where they were. Maybe she even listened to them to remember me. Good morning, Mom. Good morning. Already dressed? Do you want some tea, an omelet, some toast? I'm not hungry. Tea is fine. Do you remember Frau Dr. Keller's disgusting tea? Her name was Heller, of course. How could I possibly forget that horse piss? There's nothing like Iranian tea. Oh yes, especially with the cigarette. Do you want one? Mom, what? You know the proverb. Prosperity consists of two things: tea after a meal and a cigarette after tea. It was the first time that my mother had spoken to me in this tone. In her eyes now, I had become an adult. Mom, I can't find my tapes. I looked everywhere for them. Do you know where they are? Well, you see, since I didn't think that you would come back one day, I gave them to Homa. Homa was the daughter of one of her friends. She was 5 years younger than me, a child. After all, Mom hadn't been wrong. In any case, I no longer liked the idols of my adolescence. You're right, I'm going to buy myself some new ones. Can you give me a sponge? A sponge? Of course, darling. I decided to take this little problem as a sign. It was time to finish with the past and to look toward the future. A few hours later. Oh, Pone, how are you? Margie is. No, tell her that I've gone out. She's gone out. She'll call you back. Who told her that I was here? I did. She is your best friend. Please don't tell anyone that I'm back. I don't want to see people. Okay, I'll be home in a couple of hours. Don't forget your veil. Oh shit, I'll have to put it back on. It wasn't just the veil to which I had to readjust. There were also all the images. The 65-foot-high murals representing martyrs, adorned with slogans honoring them. Slogans like, "The martyr is the heart of history," or "I hope to be a martyr myself," or "A martyr lives forever." Especially after 4 years spent in Austria, where you were more likely to see on the walls, "Best sausages for 20 shillings." The road to readjustment seemed very long to me. There were also the streets. Many had changed names. They were now called Martyr. What's his name Avenue or Martyr something or other street. It was very unsettling. I felt as though I were walking through a cemetery, surrounded by the victims of a war I had fled. It was unbearable. I hurried home. That night. Hi, I'm home. Do you always get home so late? Yes, I have a lot of work these days. Now that the war was over, my father, an engineer, didn't know where to begin. Everything has to be rebuilt now, while we wait for the next war, which will destroy everything again. What next war? One has to be realistic. For over a century, our region has been unstable. One day, they nationalize the oil. The next, they install a dictator. Then it's the 6-Day War. Then it's Afghanistan's turn. And the return of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We'll see what comes next. I would never have thought that I would one day hear my mother sound so disillusioned. There was an uncomfortable silence. Even my mother was ill at ease. Happily, my father intervened. So, did you get some rest? Did you see how it snowed? I had to put chains on my tires to be able to drive. Incredible. 16 inches of snow. I know, it's magnificent. Did you walk around a little? What did you think of Tehran? Sordid. I was shocked. At least one street in 3 is named after a martyr. And we are in the north of the city. If you go into the poor quarters in the south of Tehran, almost all the streets are called Martyr So and So. People don't know anymore why we've had 8 years of war, why their children have died. This entire war was just a big setup to destroy both the Iranian and the Iraqi armies. The former was the most powerful in the Middle East in the 1980s, and the latter represented a real danger to Israel. The West sold weapons to both camps, and we were stupid enough to enter into this cynical game. 8 years of war for nothing. So now the state names streets after martyrs to flatter the families of the victims. In this way, perhaps they'll find some meaning in all of this absurdity. Yes, but there is also something else. This afternoon on TV, I saw mothers who were claiming to be overjoyed and gratified by the deaths of their children. I can't figure out if it's faith or complete stupidity. It's a bit of both. For 10 years, they've been made to believe that the martyrs are living in a 5-star hotel in paradise. In the meantime, the war feels more like hell, if you knew. The few months that led up to the ceasefire were particularly horrible. Tell me, Dad, I'm all ears. 1 month before the armistice, Iraq began bombing Tehran every day, as if it were necessary to destroy as much as possible before it was over. The peace hadn't yet been announced when the armed groups opposed to the Islamic regime, the Iranian Mujahideen, entered the country from the Iraqi border with the support of Saddam Hussein to liberate Iran from the hands of its fundamentalist leaders. You surely heard about it. No, Dad, I didn't know. What do you mean? Abby, really, she just spent 4 years in Europe. Yes, of course. What was I saying? Right, the Mujahideen thought that since it was the end of the war, our army wouldn't have the strength to fight anymore. Are you sure that this is a good time to tell all this? Mom, leave him alone, I'm listening. So the Mujahideen also knew that the majority of Iranians were against the regime, and they were therefore counting on popular support. But there was one thing that wasn't in their calculations. They entered from Iraq, the same Iraq that had attacked us, and against which we had been fighting for 8 years. With the result that when they arrived in Iran, no one welcomed them. For the most part, they were killed by the guardians of the revolution and the army. I'm going to bed. But the regime got scared because if these opponents had reached Tehran, they would have freed those who represented a real threat to the government. Good night. That is to say, the political prisoners who were the legitimate heirs of the revolution and who constituted our country's intelligence, SIA. So the state decided to eliminate the problem. They proposed the following choice to the detainees. Either they could renounce their revolutionary ideas and promise fidelity and loyalty to the Islamic Republic, in which case they were done serving their time, or they would be executed. And well, most of them were executed. How many did they kill? No one knows exactly. Many thousands, or rather, many tens of thousands of people. And the victims of the war? Between 500,000 and 1 million. not counting those disabled by the war, the populations ravaged by chemical weapons, those who lost their minds from the explosions, the orphans, the widows, the refugees, the material destruction. But all that is behind us. We must go forward now. We must rebuild everything. Despite my father sounding motivated, I didn't feel any real conviction in his voice. He seemed to me as blase as my mother. Let's turn in. Tomorrow I have a long day at work. Do you have any plans? No, not yet. Next to my father's distressing report, my Viennese misadventures seemed like little anecdotes of no importance. So I decided that I would never tell them anything about my Austrian life. They had suffered enough as it was.